The Gory Days are here to stay, the 80s horror show. Take a stroll down memory lane, it's time to start the show. The Gory Days, the Gory Days, the Gory Days, the Gory Days.
Welcome to the Gory Days, the show where we take a stroll down memory lane to remember our favorite horror movies from the 1980s and early 1990s. It is a fantastic day today. Last episode we talked about Hereditary and what a crazy movie that was, and even though when I started this podcast it began as an exploration into 80s and 90s horror, it has since expanded and the horizons have broadened to include all types of horror movies and even some sci-fis from all decades. But my guest today brought a very awesome podcast, an awesome movie to the podcast on the Gory Days. We are talking about It Follows, the 2015 surprise horror hit that, if it didn't itself usher in this new horror renaissance, it's definitely marching along with all the others. My guest today is a comedian, writer, and maker of things. He's the associate producer on the web series TV Guide Letter Theater. He produces 2 Degrees of Alley, the podcast featuring break-in stories from successful people in Hollywood, just like this podcast. He also produces with his wife My Mom's Movie Reviews, starring his mother-in-law. I'd love to hear some more about that, please. Oh, and he's the co-host of the Pete D'Alessandro Show. Spoiler alert. Please welcome to the Gory Days, the great Pete D'Alessandro. Welcome.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me here.
So you have your own podcast called the Pete D'Alessandro Show, but you're not the only Pete D'Alessandro on that show.
It's true. I started getting enough email for the other Pete D'Alessandros, 2 of them at least, that it started to get a little annoying, and I reached out to the one guy he's been the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders' campaign in Iowa. He does a lot of political stuff. So I reached out to him when I started getting tweets directed at him, and people started accusing me of, like, you're saying things about atheism and religion. You can't do that if you're running for office. And I'm like, 1, he's not running for office. 2, I'm not that guy. And I eventually just, I reached out to the guy and said, why don't we just make something out of this? I keep getting your emails. There's another Pete D'Alessandro who manages, what is he? Assistant GM on The Heat.
This isn't the Australian,
not the Australian guy, not the Australian, not the Australian trauma surgeon, but a different Pete D'Alessandro. Again, I used to get his emails often because someone would email
Are you
me
all
up,
just
like,
Pete D'Alessandro at gmail.com?
We all share it. Yeah.
Okay.
It just kept happening. It was like I would get people's resumes, so we just started doing this podcast to just talk about whatever the hell we felt like talking about. So it's been a couple of us so far. I don't have that many episodes because there's not that many Pete D'Alessandros. Their schedules tend to be difficult, but we've done a couple of them. It's been fun.
So the format of the show is finding a Pete D'Alessandro?
That's the best part, but we don't always get to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So you were receiving these emails. How long until you finally went, I'm going to reach out to these people?
It was years.
Years of receiving emails?
It was just once in a while.
Okay.
Once in a while, it's worse than it is, especially with the Bernie Sanders campaign. That was like, all right, this is out of control.
Your venture into the entertainment industry, was this something you always wanted to do? You always wanted to be a writer, or you always wanted to be a comedian?
I always wanted to be a writer. I didn't start doing stand-up till about 2005. I was about 25.
Okay.
And I decided that I wasn't really in a great place in my life, and I thought, I better do some shit that's going to make me feel good and impress me.
Not being in a good place has produced some of the greatest stand-ups I've seen.
It's true. It's also a terrible way to get therapy. Stand-up is not good for that. But it really did kind of light a fire under my ass, and I was like, I like this, I want to do this, and I want to become good at this.
What were you doing before that?
Nothing. And lots of it. Before I really got into stand-up, I was doing reality TV.
Okay.
Just as a day job. I continued to do a lot of production work for a long time.
This was a PA, or did you?
Yeah, PA and lots of other things.
That's how you do it.
That's how you do it. I did a lot of on-set stuff, lighting and grip and sound. And the most money I ever made in a weekend was holding a boom.
Oh, there you go. Nothing in front of the camera?
Very rarely. Very rarely. Usually my acting gigs come in where like, oh my God, Pete, we're short one person tomorrow.
Yeah, that's how it happens too.
And again, I don't care to really be an actor, so I like doing it, but I wouldn't want to go through audition after audition after audition. Again, wouldn't be fun for me, and that's not really my path.
No, I've thought about it, definitely. Like everyone who moves here, you think about taking acting classes, and you think about going for it. But yeah, just in like, I love movies, and I love everything that I've watched for this podcast, except for maybe Ghoulies. But we did Ghoulies and Chopping Mall. Chopping Mall was a fun one.
Oh,
yeah. filmed over at the Sherman or the Glendale Galleria.
No shit.
Yeah, before they remodeled it.
Wow.
Yeah, and just the best actors, the ones that win Academy Awards and stuff, have something wrong with them, and you can see it. Like the ability to turn on anguish and then turn it off and go, "What's for lunch, everyone?"
I think there's something great about that, and I guess I would love to do the work.
I respect it.
Oh yeah. But for me, no, it's not worth the agony.
I could never do that because it seems like it encourages not going to therapy. It encourages not addressing some of those things because if you cope correctly, then you might not be able to reach that later.
I think that's true of anyone at a really successful level. Like if you make $1,002,000,000, there's something incredibly wrong with you that $1 billion wasn't enough.
Yes.
Why did you need 2 more?
Yeah.
And once you get that point, you're broken. At some level, you're broken.
Oh, wait. So I want to kind of trace your timeline here. So before you did that, you were doing reality TV and in production and stuff. Are you from L.A.?
No, I'm not. I'm originally from outside Philly, way outside Philly.
East Coast.
Yeah. So pretty much not quite Amish country, but getting there. So the first house I lived in was surrounded by a farm on every side.
Okay. Did you get some Rumspringa people coming out every now and then?
Yeah, we got some weird stuff. I definitely saw horse and buggies driving by the house well before I ever saw a limousine.
Interesting.
So it was out there a bit.
Yeah.
We had like chickens in the backyard, but we didn't raise animals. It was just.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't a farm, just surrounded by farms?
On a farm, just surrounded by farms. It smelled like literal shit.
Sure.
Because there was literal shit across the street.
And then when did you finally decide to move all the way out to L.A.?
Right after college. I went to Penn State,
Okay.
got a film degree, and decided that there was really only 2 places to go, New York or L.A. I tried around Philly for about 2-3 months, and I didn't find any jobs to apply to, let alone get.
Yeah.
Let alone pay the bills.
Sure.
There wasn't much there, so I came out here, and the first thing I found was reality TV. Actually, my first job was pretty horrific. I worked on a reality TV show that I threw something on Craigslist, applied on Craigslist to something, and someone called me up at I want to say it was 11 at night, March 31st, and they said, "Can you come to work by 8 tomorrow?" I'm like, well, I guess
on April Fool's.
I'm like, wait, it's April Fool's Day. Like, hang on, I really gotta ask. Like, is this really real? Because tomorrow is April Fool's. The job was in Palm Springs. I was in Hollywood.
Oh my god!
So I was like, can you get a 2.5-hour distance from where you are right now? Check into a motel on your own dime, and then go to a job 6 hours later.
That might not even exist.
But it might not even exist. It did exist.
Okay, good.
I made about 100 a day. That was Palm Springs. At that point, yeah.
That's a paid gig.
It was a paid gig. So it was like, well, this is the first paid gig I've got. So
that's making it.
Yeah, it was. So I think that month, between the motels and driving back and forth to Palm Springs when I couldn't afford the motels, I think I netted about $800.
Okay. It's all relative. That's the thing is making it is not the 0.1% that becomes superstars or whatever. No. It's making it by getting paid for what you want to do. Exactly.
I basically paid the minimum on each of my 2 credit cards. I paid my rent, and I might have made my car payment for that $800.
That's amazing.
And that was it. It was like everything else was dead.
Yeah.
It was fine. It was great.
Did you have a place out here, or were you couch surfing?
I did. I didn't do the couch surfing thing right away. I did actually got a place. Month-to-month place. It was like a 1-bedroom of a 4-bedroom bungalow.
In the city?
Yeah, it was right in Hollywood.
Okay.
The building is still there to this day. This is 15 years ago.
Okay. I'm sure it's doing great.
It was a trash dump then, and it's been 15 years. So it probably doesn't look like it's gotten any better when I've driven past it. But I got the place because the dude who had, this is pretty sad, the dude who had it the day before had been evicted and was now living in front of it on the sidewalk.
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty bad. That's the kind of place it was. It was like, if you scraped together money and you didn't have a place to live last week, well, you could, if you got a couple $100, you could do it.
He was literally
right there on the sidewalk. And
he's an example of what could be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is like there by the grace of God. So that job felt real desperate. That $800 was like, all right, I made it in the month.
And so when you moved out here, you didn't have that job. You moved out here with just a hope and a dream.
Yeah,
did you have a car?
I had a car.
Okay.
And I just bought the car.
A dream in a car.
Yeah, exactly.
How did your family react to that? I mean, you had the degree, but you moved all the way across the country.
They had no objection, really.
They were supportive?
Yeah, they're totally supportive. I didn't really have any money saved up, but I think my dad's big gift was he would pay my car insurance that first year.
That's a huge gift.
A huge gift.
Yeah.
It was like, my God, well, all right, yeah, then I gotta start here.
Yeah, so super supportive. Are they in the industry at all? Or
No.
Okay.
Both in, both more or less medicine.
Sure.
Both PhDs.
Cool.
So living in between 4 farms. Why would you do that? I don't know.
And so you came out here and you started making it on a reality show. And then at what point did this book come along? The Un-American Diet.
So that was really the Un-American Undiet came out when I decided to, like I said, I wanted to impress myself. I lost the big job I had in reality TV. It lasted about 2 years.
Okay.
So right after that, I decided I would do stand-up, and I decided I was going to lose weight.
Okay.
And I was really upset about my lack of female attention. And I decided, like, at 25, it's not going to get any easier than it is right now. So why don't I try to at least get in shape and see if that can give me some kind of confidence. And truly, it did. I lost about 40 pounds over the next 2 months.
That must have been huge.
It was amazing.
Well, I mean, just like personally, but...
Personally, yeah, it changed my life.
Yeah, and I'm sure you got that attention.
I certainly did. Yeah, I mean, at one point I had giant arms and a six-pack. So
that's amazing.
It was pretty great.
Maybe I'll get there. Yeah. So you lost that weight, but how did that communicate into a book?
So I took a lot of notes just for myself. Mm-hmm. And after the 2
months,
it's
a journal.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, basically just a journal. Just here's what I'm thinking right now. Here's what I'll be doing. I just had this epiphany. I'll write it down. And about the time I'd lost the 40 pounds, I had 50 pages of notes.
Wow.
And I thought, you know what? Maybe other people could benefit from this. So I'll do this. I'm a writer. I can do this. And it felt like I could. What I didn't realize was that writing a book is about 10% of the work of having a book.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, who published it? Who edited it?
I got my I met a girl, started dating her, and then she edited the book, and later on I married her.
Nice. There you go.
Still there.
You tricked her.
I tricked her. And she's still in. So,
congratulations.
Thank you. So that was my editor, but I self-published. I
great.
did submit to a lot of places, a lot of publishers, but really, it's I probably could have tried harder. I probably could have learned more about that process to do a little better with it, but at the end, I felt pretty satisfied with the self-publishing.
And you did it. You're a published author.
Yeah, right,
that's pretty great.
Right.
With it's self-help, or is it just a kind of...
I would say it's probably self-help more than anything. And I think, it's more about those epiphanies. Like, all right, here's what I thought that changed me. And what were those things that really were the key from, like, how do I step back and realize what my problem is instead of just being like, well, I'll just exercise more.
How long was that process? Not the weight loss, but the book.
The book was probably, I think right around 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, 2-year turnaround. I guess when you have all of that content, it's just a matter of editing it down.
Yeah.
You don't have to generate it from scratch.
Right, because I was just generating without thought, without holding back. So
do you generate from scratch? Are you working on a book or anything like that?
Yeah, I guess I am.
Cool.
I'm working on a novel.
Nothing we want to talk about too much about.
Yeah, I'm admitting that over the air. All right,
fantastic.
Good.
Oh, great. You're working on a novel.
Working on a novel. So that's my next writing project. I've got a couple pilots done, but I tend to be much more the planner of a writer.
Okay.
So I am not the guy who does journals anymore for where I come up with anything.
Sure. It was a good place to learn.
It was a good place to learn, yeah. I went through some phases as a writer, trying to teach myself. At one point, I decided I was going to write one new pilot every month.
Okay.
Did that for about 6 months. So generated a bunch of stuff. Some of them were not good and not salvageable, but some of them were.
How do you know if they're not good? Or how do you know what's good if you write what's not good?
Right. I mean, you can't not know it's good until you've actually finished it. You can't do anything unless you have something done.
Yeah, who was it that said they wrote 100 screenplays before they decided one was good?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some of that.
And so these were for TV? Any features?
Not in that period, but yeah, I've written a couple features.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one feature that I've been shopping around and I've got
a
couple eyeballs on, but we'll see. But that's a 4-person cast independent film, real small, low budget.
Nice. Is that sci-fi or
comedy?
Okay.
Comedy. But there's
great.
some hard science to it. I don't know if you can call it science fiction, but
what's the log line?
Space plus one. So that was four people trapped in a car, self-driving car. 2 of them are the people who have built the car. They're now on their way to sell it. But the 2 people in the back seat are their spouses, and they just realize as the car malfunctions, the 2 people in the back seat have been having an affair. And at that point, they're stuck trying to fix the car, trying to deliver the car, and also survive their relationships.
That's fantastic. So it's really a character piece.
Really
at its
a character.
Core.
And
like
the
science is a setting.
Yes, absolutely. Science is a setting. As good science fiction would be. Again, I'm like, can you count self-driving car if it's a slightly different self-driving car as science fiction?
That's what's interesting is that if you had pitched this before Tesla and all of that, then absolutely it's complete fiction. But the
5
closer
years ago,
it makes me think of the new Child's Play remake remake or reboot or remix that they're trying to put out where Chucky isn't a possessed serial killer doll anymore. Now he's a rogue AI because it's just kind of society upgrading their horrors. We always have to make people afraid of what's the new thing.
Yeah, that's true, because that is what we're afraid of, and we're easily scared of what's like, oh, it's right there.
I remember when GPS first came out, there was that CSI episode of the rich couple going out to an opera, and the GPS takes them down a dark alley, and they get killed because the hackers hacked their GPS, and my mom, of course, ran with that. That's what you can tell when technology is getting really interesting because people start getting irrationally afraid of it.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
So yeah, you mentioned off Mike that your wheelhouse is more sci-fi, and in fact, you have a short out there, Camp. How did that come about?
Camp definitely isn't sci-fi.
No, it's not. But
yeah, that is my wheelhouse, and I keep working outside my wheelhouse, which probably isn't great.
Well, you're spreading your. I mean, it's not spreading too thin. It's.
But I'm learning different capacities, and it's certainly cheaper than shooting sci-fi. That's for sure. Camp was really
being a Pete of all trades.
Being a Pete of all trades. So what happened with Camp was I was working as an engineer all over the place. I was actually working out of a suitcase, essentially.
A traveling engineer.
Traveling engineer. I was working for a contract on the U.S. Postal Service for some machinery.
Okay.
And
some top secret stuff, I'm sure.
Exactly, top secret. So sorting mail, basically working on a giant machine that sorted mail. As a part of that, I would travel constantly. Like, I would get off a plane and check my voicemail, and they're like, you know what? Now that you've landed in Kansas City, we don't really need you there anymore. Can you get back on a plane for Detroit?
Oh, my God.
So that would happen. Not
some frequent flyer miles.
Yeah, some real frequent flyer miles. They paid me a lot of money because of the horrible travel, horrible schedule, and it was 80-hour weeks.
You could have no social life.
Absolutely no social life. I really tried to do stand-up. I was doing it, but you can't book anything. Like, hey, I'm going to be in town for 2 days, I hope. Can I get a spot in 2 days? Yeah. So you really didn't have a lot of time to even do that stuff. So did as much as I could, but eventually I'm staying at my friend's place, and I haven't written in forever because I'm working 80-hour weeks. So his cat, after a couple of months, it was awful cat. Just so cruel. I did grow to love him, honestly.
Sure.
But at one point, like, we bonded, we'd figured it out, and he just turned out of nowhere and scratched the living shit out of me. And it made me realize, like, oh my God, this isn't my cat. This isn't my house. I don't actually have this guy as a roommate. Like, I'm in Maryland. Why am I in Maryland? What am I doing? This isn't my life. I got to go back to writing. I got to go back to doing something.
Wow.
So I decided the first thing I had was this idea called Camp. It was a movie about three guys who are hiking in the woods. They're lost, and one of them dies.
Yeah.
The other two are wondering, like, what happened? Because none of us saw it. So did you do anything, or did I? Do you think I did something? So it's that whole game of two guys trying to figure that out.
Yeah, no, it's great. I watched it.
Oh, thanks.
Yes,
thanks.
It really is
a little bit. There's definitely an element of. I think at the time I had probably too recently watched The Edge, David Mamet.
I haven't seen that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
I've heard of it.
Not that dissimilar a plot, but this is a 10-minute, very, very cheap version of it.
Sure.
So it was fun, but the last words of this camp was, let's make camp.
Right.
So that was really, honestly, a sort of reference to myself. Like, let's make this fucking thing.
And so who made it? Because you wrote this.
I did it. I wrote it.
You wrote and directed it?
And produced it, yeah.
And cast it and directed and produced it?
Dude, the cast was amazing.
They're great.
They are great.
Friends of yours? Or?
Yeah, friends of mine. So Fernando Rivera was...
Shout out.
Yeah, great comic, a friend of mine. And I hadn't realized, but I really had his voice in my head when I wrote his part.
Okay.
I found two other guys, Tim Clifton, who played our lead, who was brilliant, great
He's
guy.
good.
Yeah, and then we had Scott Foster, who unfortunately, rest in peace, passed away a few years ago, but brilliant actor on his own. What a guy. And brought so much to it. Scott was, Victor, God damn it, you would call me on that. Darker skinned guy, taller guy. He was
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, he did a great job.
He did a great job, and he was just this huge personality to be around. It was so much fun. And I'd actually written one of the parts for the car movie I mentioned, Stuck in Car. I'd written one of the parts for him before he passed away.
That's great.
So yeah.
So did that make any circuits on festivals?
Yeah, I made a couple festivals. The Action on Film was probably the biggest of those. Actually, Scott eventually wound up working with the Idlewild Film Festival just a little later, and we went there for a big show. I think we had 2 screenings there, and he said, I didn't make the one of them. He said people were it was packed and people were on their feet. And I was like, well, you can't do better than that.
Okay.
I can't do better than that. I was so happy. So real happy with that film.
So we met through a mutual friend of the show, Kimberly Solomon. How do you know Kimberly?
So Kimberly and I met at the Austin Film Festival. I think we were both semifinalists last year with different projects.
Okay.
I had a spec script and she had a feature, and So we both met at the Austin Film Festival, hit it off, and we had actually lived at one point like a block from each other in Manhattan.
Oh,
like,
wow, really?
Block,
I was going to say small town, but small world.
Small place. Yeah, so she was great. We hit it off, and we've been trading scripts ever since. Notes, reads, whatever.
Yeah, she's great, and I've been trying to get her to come back so we can talk about Final Destination. We brought her on, and we talked about Arrival, which was a great movie, but during the podcast in the episode, she's like, oh, and I also like the Final Destination movies. I was like, well, why didn't you bring that? This is a horror podcast. So I guess that's my way of segueing over into the genre. So I know that your wheelhouse is more sci-fi, but I've found that it's hard to get into sci-fi without finding elements of horror. Not necessarily the other way around, but it seems like sci-fi does have a reliance on the same kinds of tropes and tension and suspense. But how do you feel?
I'll say they are the same genre. I don't like the word genre, but honestly, they're the same thing. So
horror sci-fi is redundant.
Yeah, I think so. What we're trying to do most of the time, especially if you're looking at any kind of supernatural element to horror, what you're really looking at is how do we deal with something that, we can just sort of use an analog to step up a conversation about a real thing that is in our lives without the supernatural or science fiction element to it. Mm-hmm. So they are the same thing. One of them tends to be a certain, it's either thriller or horror. It's to scare you or something tense. That emotion is the one thing that kind of runs through horror. Sci-fi can be kind of all over the place. It can go anywhere. You can go to comedy like Galaxy Quest, or you can go to Alien, which is a horror movie, except it's also sci-fi.
Yeah, but sci-fi, like more to your point, is that it's a malleable genre. It can be applied and put onto like a sci-fi romance, a sci-fi horror, like you say, a sci-fi action.
Right. Her is another great romance.
Yes, and that hits on another thing that I didn't think about, is that both horror and sci-fi both attempt to understand the ununderstandable. Like, we use science, hopefully, to eventually explain something that at one point was no different from magic, was no different from ghost stories, and we just discovered the scientific reasoning for it.
Yeah, and I think Mary Shelley is the one thing that just opens my eyes. Yeah, just like, well, wait a minute. There's really nothing to call science fiction before this. I mean, there is, but man, what a clear-cut invention of a genre, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, I wonder what would be the first introduction of science fiction in our history, because like I bet there's an argument that the Bible has elements of science fiction in it.
I wonder. Yeah.
But that's not what this podcast is about. We're not talking about the Bible and its elements of science fiction. So why do you find yourself so enamored with this particular, I won't use the word genre, but sci-fi?
Yeah. But yeah, with sci-fi, I think for me, it gives us such a wide range to talk about anything specific. So you have a world, and you can put that world together any way you like. Mm-hmm. Whether that's just, Black Mirror does a great job of just taking us 15 minutes into the future. That's the premise of that.
Yeah, again, it's very grounded.
Yeah, and comes to close to a horror many times.
Yeah. Some of them are even romances, which is fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been a couple great romances. Yeah. Everyone likes to talk about San Junipero.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, what a wonderful episode. So we can take a world, and then we can ask some questions, and ask some questions about us. We can use that world to explore the answer to that question, or at least a potential answer to that question.
Yeah, that still plays on a theme from our reality.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think Galaxy Quest is really this question about redemption.
You brought that up a second time. Yeah. That's my dad's favorite movie, is Galaxy Quest.
It's so good.
It really is great
comedy.
Yeah. Both as like a lampoon of Star Trek and as its own
just
standalone
as its own movie too. I mean, it really does work well. There's this one scene at the end of Galaxy Quest, this one moment really where we finally see Alan Rickman's character, like he's hated this stupid line over and over.
His arc,
his whole arc kind of completes, and the guy who's been worshiping him, is dying, and he finally says the goddamn line again. And this is the first time it's meant something.
Yeah, he believes it.
He really believes it. He loves it, and it's this moment where you tear up and laugh at the same time. That's if you told me if that was possible, I would say no. Clearly, you can't have two different emotions that are in that much conflict at the same time. There it is. There can't be 10 of those I can think of in all of film.
That's interesting. The only when you mention that, the only thing I think of is like BoJack Horseman, some show that masterfully balances between like one moment you could be laughing your ass off, crying, and then within like the same breath they'll lay something so heavy on you that those tears are still useful, just in a different context now.
Right. It's so great.
So I'm sorry I interrupted you. That sci-fi kind of plays on it answers those questions you were saying.
Yeah, it does, and I think that horror can do the same thing. Not all horror, for me at least, does that. But I'll tell you what does. It Follows. It Follows is a perfect example.
Yes, it does. Well, there you go. Yeah. So, It Follows is a fantastic movie, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about all things It Follows, more Pete D'Alessandro, more me, Kyle, your host, who I forgot to introduce, on the Gory Days.
The Gory Days.
Welcome back to the Gory Days. My guest today is Pete D'Alessandro, and today we are talking about the 2015 horror film It Follows. So I like to give a little bit of a timeline for people who may or may not be interested in the fact that director and writer David Robert Mitchell conceived of this film based on some dreams that he had in his youth of being followed by a mysterious person. And the first time I read that, I thought of Wes Craven and how Freddy Krueger was invented from, I can't remember if it was a dream or a real story, but I just remember it was him seeing a striped man knocking on his door like rapidly, and that scared the bejesus out of him. So, the role of sexual transmission actually came later from Mitchell's desire for something that could transfer between people. So, it's interesting listening to his interviews and articles where he's kind of dissected his own film, because he doesn't feel that the movie has that much to do with sexual transmission and STDs, but it's once again a thing of like, once you create an art, it's not yours anymore. It's for interpretation of other people.
Right.
Like, I'm sure people could watch Camp and find things that you never would have inferred from it. So in 2011, David Robert Mitchell finally starts writing the movie, and they start filming in Detroit in 2013. I think just about a year of filming and editing, because they're done by May 17th of 2014, where it debuts at the Cannes Film Festival. And it takes the Cannes Festival by storm, picked up by Radius TWC for distribution, and finally we get the limited release in the United States on March 13th, 2015. I definitely didn't see this in theaters. I wish I had, but this was one that I just waited for. I don't even remember that much like press or marketing for it.
I don't either. I honestly don't remember much, except a couple people had told me about it, so I waited till it was on all the streaming platforms, and enough people told me about it and told me to watch it that I decided, all right, fine, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, it was word of mouth.
Yeah, fine. I'll with raised eyebrows. Let me see if this is any good, and I'll watch 5 minutes.
That's the exact mentality I had with like Paranormal Activity.
Yeah,
I remember hearing so many people say how great it was,
right.
and but yeah, of course. And then it wasn't until like the marketing had like this second wind where they're like showing footage of people in the theater like freaking out and stuff. And so I finally went to like my college was doing a showing at their theater, and it was so great because you've seen that movie, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
The first half of it, everyone's joking and laughing around, but then when shit gets real, the whole theater was silent for the rest of it.
It holds your stomach tight.
Yeah, that's a great one, and I love to talk about that one on this show. But after being released in March of 2015, the movie has had an amazing run and is actually inspiring a sequel. I had no idea, and they certainly didn't, that this movie would do that well, and so the sequel that they're planned apparently has them following a victim who attempts to trace it all the way back to its source to kind of answer the questions that, frankly, I wasn't interested in having the answers to, but I'm sure someone out there is. So, as I mentioned, written and directed by David Robert Mitchell, the music is by Rich Vreeland, a.k.a. Disaster Piece. That's a Disaster, P-E-A-C-E. I went on Spotify and listened to some of his music. He's got like this kind of chiptune-y style. It's nice. Apparently, he also did the music for Fez, a video game that I've never played. I don't know either. And as I mentioned off mic, this is not an A24 film. I totally thought it was, and it has that same kind of feel of a high-budget, indie-feeling horror movie. But nope, it's in fact Northern Lights Films produced it, and Animal Kingdom with Two Flints distributed it. So the movie stars Maika Monroe as Jay, Keir Gilchrist as her friend Paul, Daniel Zavato as Greg, this like heartthrob that lives across the street, Jake Weary as Hugh, a.k.a. Jeff, Olivia Lucardi as Yara, and Lily Sepp, or Seppi, as Jay's sister, Kelly. Who's that? I have that written down. I don't remember. So, really quick, I'll just go through. I don't want to do beat by beat. I'll just go through the synopsis really quick to remind everyone of what the movie is, and then we'll talk about some of those themes. So, long story short, Jake has sex with a date of hers named Hugh, and it goes great until Hugh chloroforms her, and she wakes up tied to a wheelchair where she's introduced to it, this thing that Hugh explains to her that will follow her, hence it follows. He explains that whoever has sex with a person who is being followed by it will transfer it to another person, and in this case, now Jay is being followed. Jay goes to the hospital, police investigate, they eventually find out that Hugh was a fake name, living in a fake house. So, after Jay sees an old lady, walking at her at school, she finally flees to an ice cream shop where Paul and her sister Kelly are working. So they have a sleepover, it breaks in. Honestly, the scariest shot in the whole movie happens there with the tall man, Yeah. They drive to Greg's fake house where they find his name is Jeff. They talk to him. He explains some more rules. But eventually they make it to a lake house that Greg, the heartthrob, drove them to. They escape from it again. They drive off. It gets... Honestly, the last half of this movie is a lot of just like driving and waiting for the thing to show up. It's good, but it's playing into maybe how I'm going to rate this movie at the end of this episode. Eventually, they get Greg to have sex. Well, Jay gets Greg to have sex with her, and so she passes it on, thinking that she's safe. Until it gets Greg, and that's really the only shot we see of how it kills people, and we'll get into that. It's pretty graphic. So now that Greg's dead, it's following Jay again. They have a wonderful plan to go to the community pool and put a bunch of electric appliances into the pool after they've lured it there. It fails miraculously, and Jay sleeps with Paul. And that's the end of the movie.
Yep. You got
Pretty
it.
much
You
in a
nailed it.
nutshell.
You nailed it, yeah.
Yeah. So if you haven't watched the movie, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. Ideally, you've seen it before. But right off of the bat, let's start right with it. So it is real in this movie. It physically exists in the space. And that's one of the most fascinating things is those moments where they put like a blanket over its head and stuff.
Right.
So like... I don't know, it seems like a good place to start is like, of course you could just like constantly move around and escape from it, right?
Yes,
but
you
you
can.
never would truly escape from it.
It would work if you had a job as an online blogger.
yeah,
But it
as a
would
travel
not, like,
blogger.
You can't get a job at Subway and have this thing follow. You can't go anywhere for 8 straight hours reliably.
No, you'd have to be like a millionaire who has homes all over the world, or
Right.
something.
Right, get one hotel room in every country for a year.
And even then, that implies that it can't like get on an airplane or something, even though it's intelligent.
It seems like it could totally get on an airplane if you were letting it close enough to get on the airplane.
Yeah.
In which case, maybe you could force it to fly somewhere else.
So
But
I guess-
again, you could just fly somewhere else.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So why'd you bring this movie in? I'm
Yeah, why
curious.
did I
What's
bring
your
this movie in?
relationship?
I think I love this as a fascinating piece. This movie it answers one question, and that is, how do you live with an STD that you can't get rid of? And to me, I don't know what the writer and director said. There's no other way for me to interpret this movie.
It's really hard. The first thing anyone would come out of this is, oh, it's a supernatural STD.
Yes.
Like whether or not it's a direct allegory for people in the real world to think about,
Right.
it is a supernatural STD.
Yes, this is a sexually transmitted curse.
Yeah. And it's so original.
Yeah.
I've never seen a film do that before, where like we've had ghost stories, we've had curse stories, but the idea of transferring it through sex is so unique
Yeah,
and
it's
so
so unique.
original, so fresh.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that cliche in horror movies, like, oh, you can't have sex, you'll die. Well, let's just start with that.
Yeah, exactly. This, if anything, immediately subverts that. The trope that if you are a promiscuous, especially woman, and you're having premarital sex, then you are doomed to be brutally slaughtered and punished for it.
Right.
Unless you're the naive girl who ends up not a virgin at the end, then...
Yeah.
Or if that does end up a virgin, then she's totally safe.
But sometimes the boyfriend dies instead of her.
Yes,
That's why
yeah.
we trade that trope.
But horror movies have a history of vilifying female sexuality, so this movie takes that right at the beginning, and it's great. So yeah, you're touching on one of those first major themes that it is a metaphor both for STDs, but also just for sexual awakening and awareness and puberty.
Right.
So like... to your point that I can't see any other way to interpret this, I was sitting there writing my notes and I was like, I don't know what other themes there are in this. So the things that I'm bringing up here are kind of a stretch, but I feel like they're still interesting to think about. So when I say that it is a metaphor for sexual awakening, there are a lot of scenes in this movie that juxtapose beginning versus before sex versus after sex. The first, well, not the first shot. The first shot is that awesome 360 choreographed thing. Great intro to the movie. But the first shot of Jay is her in the pool relaxing, and there are those two boys that are looking at her, and she's like, I see you.
Right.
And she's like mildly inconvenienced and annoyed, but it's still kind of fun because she's a child. That's what kids do. There's nothing nefarious about that. They just peek at each other. And it's after she gets it and after she has sex with Hugh, aka Jeff, that she's back in her pool and she can't, they're not even there anymore, but she can't stand the idea that something is looking at her with lustful intentions.
Right.
And whether or not that's this monster that's coming to kill her, which it is what I'm arguing is kind of like the allegory for this, or if it's just a horny man across the street.
Right.
Is that like being awoken? Hugh, aka Jeff, awakens her to the idea that she's never safe and is always being looked at with a lustful eye.
Right.
And I always come up to this when I want to discuss feminist themes and ideas, because as a gay man, I only have so much agency to talk about this, and I don't want to generalize anyone's experience. And I feel that a woman, a person really, but women particularly, learn that they are not safe eventually. That all of us go through childhood and we do things, and parents say things like "come back after dark," but we don't understand that until we learn it the hard way, or we're taught it, or we just grow up being a goody. And so Jay has these eyes on her that it just doesn't matter until after she's awoken to this idea of never being safe and constant unease.
Yeah, Kyle, you're so right. And here's where that really comes in. And I think it's easy for me to overlook this because it's so awful. But there is this date rape element to that beginning. I mean, she's decided to have sex with someone, and the weirdest date rape ever. He has sex with her and then assaults her.
That's what's insane. Is it was consensual,
right? And then at that point, and she says that to the cops. Oh, it was consensual, but that wasn't. And at that point, it really is a date rape, and it's horrible. It's horrifying.
It is,
and that's an awful way into this. And again, that's still. I mean, you can think about STDs and that scenario. That's awful.
You can think about it of like unwanted pregnancy in that way. Like that's something that Alabama's dealing with. Like
right.
the disdain that your friends and loved ones would have, even like no matter how much support her friends are giving her, right. They can't understand. They are literally blind to the problem she's having.
Man. Oh wow. What a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, that they can show as much support as they want, but they haven't been violated. They haven't experienced the sexual trauma that she has that now results in her looking at her body completely differently.
Right.
Before she's going to the movies, before she's going on her date, there's that long pull zoom in of her like looking at herself and doing her makeup and stuff. And afterward, after she's gone to the police and after they've investigated things, there's that scene of her just looking at herself again and just
totally different.
And just being disgusted at like what other people would find attractive. And it's just, yeah. And I have yet to experience anything like that. I hope I never do. And I feel horrible for people out there that have. And I think it's kind of offensive for the director to say, no, that's not what it is. Like, it doesn't.
I do wonder about that one. But yeah, I think, there's no better way to talk about it. Like, I don't want to go through that, but how can I relate to it? Well, how about art?
Yeah.
How about art as a way to open people's eyes to that?
I would love to hear your perspective as a writer. Like, I am personally terrified of writing a female character, let alone a female's, like, general experience like this. Like, I don't know if David Robert Mitchell experienced something like this. I don't know if he interviewed women that experienced this, but there's a part of me that is like, for representation's sake, like who, I don't know, where does the responsibility lie as a writer?
I think that's a great question. For me, it relies on being a writer.
Okay.
So I'm a straight white man. You know what perspective I'm going to bring to everything? Straight white man. So the least I can do is try to introduce characters that challenge that perspective and bring that in. Because any writer's room that ever hires me, they're going to be hiring a straight white man. So I better be able to find some other voices that are a little more interesting. I don't think if you hire a black woman that we would assume that she can't write a white man. I think we have a responsibility as writers to be able to write other characters and write other people. You can't be afraid of that.
That's great. And does the responsibility carry over into interviewing people for their experiences and trying to get like a real perspective, whether or not they're able of telling their story? You're able to take their experience and communicate it?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think what can you possibly do if you don't ask that person questions?
And now, as the devil's advocate, when does that become appropriation? Where is the line?
Yeah, so it depends. How is your subject feeling about it?
Yeah.
That's the line. If they're comfortable, then I think you're okay. If they're not, then you're not okay.
And it seems like there's a push for sure, especially now in this time of inclusion and diversity, that it's like if this is an Asian American story, then it better have been written or directed or both by an Asian American team. Because if not, then it feels disingenuous. And that's just for instance. It just seems like if you're telling a blank story, you should be of the blank.
Right. And I don't think that's really realistic. I mean, maybe that is the flavor of the day, but I don't think that's really realistic. Because
unfortunately, not everyone can tell a good story, even if they're lived it. You know, it takes something different to be able to communicate a good story.
You really need to be able to find someone else who can be not too close to the story to tell it correctly. I just watched Always Be My Maybe the other night. Just came out.
I was halfway through that, and I had to go to sleep.
It was a great movie. It's about.
It's got Randall Park and Ali Wong.
Randall Park and Ali Wong. She does not play someone who is Korean. He does. The writer is neither Chinese or Korean or anything. She is, I think, of an Indian background.
Yeah, right? But she plays Vietnamese character,
Yeah, so you can't really you can't narrow that. Like, when is it too narrow? Well, what part of China are you from? Because the story is about someone who's from northern China. At some point, we all have to just be like, well, we're people, and we have to be able to tell each other stories.
Yeah, otherwise it becomes Asian people movies and black people movies.
And we can't really have that. That doesn't really work.
Yeah, and yet, what's his name? Perry has made an entire career off of it.
Yes, for sure.
What is his name? What? Isn't it Perry?
Tyler Perry?
Tyler Perry, thank you. Yeah. Big Mama's House. Not Big Mama's House. God, I'm all over the place. Martin Lawrence. I'm going to erase all of this so I don't sound offensive. The next theme that I have written here. Oh wait, so another thing on the sexual assault and rape survivor allegory is how the police and neighbors treat her. That when the police show up, Greg and her neighbors come out and are looking across the street, and they're like, "She's such a mess."
Yeah.
And the police questions are even like, they have a condescending tone to them. Like, I wrote them down. They're not condescending. It was it consensual?
Right.
And have you ever been to his home? And she carries so much shame in her answers, because it's like, no, I realized no, and it was consensual, and I didn't even know who he was.
Right.
He wasn't even who he said he was.
Right. It was like, well, I went to his house, but I never went inside, and I never thought that was weird. I never questioned that. But now that I'm back here, it does seem weird, and that all comes across in the acting.
But in the real world, that's not weird.
That's not weird at all.
Tinder and Bumble and these things live off that.
I can't count the number of people I've slept with who I've never been to their house.
Or knew their real name for sure.
Their real name,
right?
I have no idea.
Like, it's not like I'm asking for their driver's license or something, but there's still an element of you should have a sixth sense of that.
Yeah,
especially if you're going to be. But do you see what we're doing right now?
Yeah, you're right. It's like you can't know that.
We're victim blaming right now, though. Right. That's exactly. Oh my God, you just tricked me.
We've all been there. We've all done this stuff. And you know what? Normally, nothing bad happens to us because it's not an unreasonable leap for us to do those things.
And if something bad happens, it's not your fault. It's not your fault, and that doesn't paint you as a deviant for the rest of your life.
Right. It is in no way. It is someone else's fault. Someone else does the crime. Not the victim.
Because we should not be adding more to them. They have so much on their plate already. As a survivor of sexual assault or rape in this movie, it's communicated by an actual freaking monster that may be killing them at any moment. And having your friends and family lay extra blame on you for, well, he wasn't even who he said he was. You should have known better.
Let's go more allegory here. And just not only do they're not really relating to that, they don't believe her.
Yeah.
They don't believe, there's a monster following you. I'm sure there is.
Even as they're helping her, they're at the pool, and they're still like, where is it?
Right. I can't see it.
Is it following? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Greg dies because he doesn't take it seriously. He doesn't believe.
He has
another STD reference there.
Yeah. He has no intention of supporting her.
No, not at all. He's like, this makes you feel better. I got laid. It's all good.
Yeah.
No, don't worry about it. We're all safe.
Yeah, and he's killed by his mom, in the form of his mom, which is so crazy.
So crazy.
And that's where we see how it kills. Yeah. So we see Annie in the beginning, and her leg is like broken frontwards all the way over her. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, it just like beats them to death. Yeah, it just like throttles you. And sometimes it does. Sometimes it just pulls on your hair.
Yeah.
Sometimes it throws things at you from across the room.
Right.
And sometimes it humps you to death. So I couldn't figure out, what its modus operandi was. But that one, for sure, is... I still can't make heads or tails of it. And I feel like it's shot in that way to also make it. But all I know is that it is sexually charged and horrific when it is killing Greg. Because we see Greg and his neck is broken. Yeah, so like I said, once you've been violated, there is no easy fix. It will be with you forever, and now everyone you look at, you have to look at with suspicion. Even like, it could be your mom.
Right.
It could be your dad. And I feel like that line
That
is...
victim, yeah.
Exactly. It's about, like, it could be someone you know.
Right.
It could be a total stranger, or it could be someone you know, just like in real life.
What a great perspective on, like, just being assaulted, never feeling safe again, and who's around you? Who's the next assaulter? Who's the next person that's going to harm you? Yeah.
Exactly.
And you don't know.
It could be someone that was once a benevolent person. Yeah, you don't know. And that's the real horror. The other side of that coin is something that I wrote down here that I'm very proud of. Sexscapism. We can't escape. In a 2015 article in The Guardian, the director, David Robert Mitchell, said, "We can't escape our mortality, but love and sex are two ways in which we can, at least temporarily, push death away."
Yeah.
So that's the director kind of explaining in a paraphrased quote here that the monster is just a metaphor for encroaching death, and that having sex and losing your virginity awakens you to your mortality, that it's like, I'm on the next stage of my growth and mortality is ever coming closer, and it's never going to stop unless I have sex. Then that's one way to push away the encroaching mortality.
I would be more on board with that allegory if we were talking about, having kids is the thing that pushes away your mortality.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only way I'm really going to live forever, by having kids, and a piece of me lives forever, and isn't that nice?
That would be an interesting thing in the sequel if they
Yes,
touch on. Is
yeah.
like, oh, that's the only way to stop the It Follows is to have a child
kid.
from it.
So just be
Oh,
followed
but then
by
that's a
9
really
months.
pro-life angle.
Oh God, yeah, it is. So maybe that doesn't work. But yeah, so I don't buy that. That the theme doesn't resonate for me.
Yeah. I don't know. It, like I said, these ones are kind of loose and I'm kind of reaching.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, that's why he said it. That's what's so interesting about it.
So that was the only things that I was able to find. Can you think of any other themes or stuff that popped out at you? Because I was really reaching. Like, I get... Because there's the part where Greg is teaching her to shoot, and it's pretty much a red herring.
Yeah.
Because she's like, because that's an element of safety, and like the brave one, Jodie Foster, she suffers mugging and sexual assault, and she finds her agency again in a gun.
Yeah.
And in this one, that's where it kind of seems like it's going.
I think that it does go there. I mean, there's that scene at the beach where she shoots the thing,
and it stops it.
It pays off. Like, oh
If
my
only
God,
for
she
a
can shoot
second.
it, and she gets it in the head, and like that didn't matter.
Yeah.
So, okay, gun isn't the answer here. Mm-hmm. This is not something we can fight.
Yeah.
And I thought that was another great piece of looking at this as an STD.
Yeah, I never
This
thought
isn't going to
about
go away. This isn't going to go away. Okay, well then we have to do something else. Maybe I can just outrun it forever.
Yeah.
Which also we're going to find out doesn't work.
And it's awesome that every single solution or proposed solution to the monster is a metaphor.
Yeah.
Is a metaphor. Running from something, trying to fight something, and even some of the quotes in the movie refer to. I love that. Maybe there's probably a term for it in writing where a character, like say for instance that they're in class and the focus is on the student, but the background like diegetic noise is the teacher talking about something that pertains like to the overarching themes. Is there a word for that?
I don't, but there's such a lantern to hang on that. That's not it. But there's something there. You've nailed something.
Yeah,
we
where
need
they
a
like
term there.
hide.
We need a term there. Right, hiding that exposition.
Because it'll usually be like a montage of the student, like maybe slipping through grades or something, and in the background is talking. So the one I'm referring to in this is when what is her name? I wrote it down here. The one who's always reading, Yara, played by Olivia Lucardi, is reading The Idiot by Dostoevsky. Sorry, my podcast kitty. Is that okay?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Next.
She's reading Dostoevsky's The Idiot, and there's a quote from him about waiting and come what may, like sitting down and waiting. And then there's the other line at the end of being human and knowing that will at some point truly end, and how that's the real horror. Right. It's not dying; it's knowing I will die.
Right, knowing that I will no longer be.
Yeah, that's it. And yet there's some kind of freedom to that too.
Yeah.
So a couple of other things. The time frame of this movie is fascinating. Yeah. It's intentionally kept ambiguous through, and I totally didn't notice it my first viewing. I only noticed it through like doing my notes, is that the first woman at the beginning, Annie, has a cell phone and a modern car, but but her friend Yara has the clamshell e-reader thing, which looks futuristic. but there are also like old cars throughout the movie. It's really bizarre. What do you take from that?
I thought this was a sort of an attempt to be timeless.
Is that it?
I didn't know how else to interpret that, and I thought it worked great.
I think so too.
It never bumped for me. It never bothered me. So I was totally in the moment, and I don't need to know when we are. We're in an age that has cell phones. I'm good. That could be 20 years. I'm good. That's all I need.
That's the thing, is if they don't introduce anything too different for my mind to take over, because then it would be a Black Mirror thing. Like the clamshell e-reader only makes sense to me because e-readers exist. I've never seen a clamshell one, but
I haven't either. And it struck me the second time I watched it. I was like, "What is that an older device? Is that like a Palm Pilot?" Or is that something we haven't invented yet? I don't know.
I think, like you say, it's a thing to make it timeless. That it's bridging e-readers with clamshells,
right?
Like to make it like this unknowable time. But more than that, the temperature. You have no idea like what the weather is like. It's supposed to be in Detroit, but there are they wear coats and jackets and t-shirts and swimsuits during the day, and barely anything at all at night. And they don't seem to be at all uncomfortable. So
and again, I think that's just to play to the genre, just to play to horror. Like, all right, well, we're gonna wear anything because in horror movies you can do that. We're gonna need to be scantily clad at some point because it's horror and it's about sex.
I like that interpretation. I interpret it as it's supposed to be like the whole movie is supposed to be like a nightmare. Yeah. And in that sense, when you try to make sense of nightmare things, like what time is it? What day is it? Where is this taking place? Am I hot or cold? Like those things aren't as concerning as your teeth falling out or whatever.
Right.
Is that the other one? Yeah. So I think that was the last thing that I had here. Last was just, that idea that this woman, while in most horror movies, when they dare to have sex for pleasure, are punished, she is punished, but spends the rest of her movie reclaiming her agency in a new, scarier world by finding someone who's willing to share it with her through Paul.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that ending is the moment for me. And I actually had to look this up after I watched it again, because other people interpret that ambiguously, and I thought there was no room for
There's YouTube videos where it's like, oh, what really happened at the end?
And to me, it's like, well, how do you learn to live with an STD? And the answer, just in those last couple of shots, is you get on with your life, and you have to, like, all right, well, it's going to follow us. But we're still together. We're still going to live the best life we can, and that's not going to ruin us. We're going to continue to be normal people.
But nothing will change that. It follows.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
And I thought that was the best part of the whole movie.
Yeah, it's great. I like it because at the end of the day, this story isn't about a woman having sex and then being punished for it for 2 hours. It's about her clawing her way back to some semblance of safety again.
Yeah.
I like that it takes another person who probably doesn't understand it yet. I at the end of the movie, I like to think that Paul still hasn't seen it. But he went out to those prostitutes, and I like that it's left open-ended whether or not he passed it on to those prostitutes, because that seems like a pretty safe way to get rid of it.
Yeah, I guess it would, because there would be a lot of stuff going on there. There'd be a lot of pieces there.
Yeah. So the one thing that I like to do is ask what happens after the end of the movie. Yeah. Like what happens? Do Jay and Paul live and just happily ever after? Does it ever get them? Does it matter?
I think it never does.
Yeah.
I think that's how I'm going to interpret it. I don't know if that means they die of cancer at 75 or they, whatever, but I think they've learned to live with it, and I think that's the real mission there.
Is this the only it?
I don't think
STDs, are there multiple strains and versions?
Right, and I think that we'll find all that in the sequel.
I guess so. Yeah.
For me, one works fine. That's all I need for this movie to work. One works fine. If there were hundreds of others across the world, sure, I guess somebody's gonna get two of them at the same time. That's gotta happen, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. For such an amazing horror film, there are only 2 deaths, and one of them is, I guess they're both on screen, but you never really see like the blows being done to them. There's no gore, there's no blood, and yet it's still effective. So this last segment, we like to rate our movies on a scale of 1 to 5 thumbs, 1 being the best and 1 being the worst and 5 being the best, on any criteria under the sun that you want. Pete, what'd you think of It Follows?
Man, I got to go at least 4. I'm leaning towards 5, but I got to go at least 4. I think this is a fantastic movie. It's entertaining the whole time for me. There are slow parts where there needs to be for me, and the rest of it just feels great.
What do you mean where it needs to be?
I think there's a point in Act 2, and I wrote this down. As Act 2 kind of starts, we're like, well, she's had this horrible experience, and nobody quite believes her, and she doesn't know what to do, and she's not sure if she really believes this thing's really following her. And, well, I don't know, let's try to live our lives for a few minutes, and we see a few minutes of that at the beginning of Act 2, where she's trying to go on in a normal life, but this is not normal life anymore.
No, it's not sustainable. Yeah.
And I think that was the slow part that needed to be slow.
I like that interpretation. So traditionally, we will award our thumbs to characters in the movie. You can give one character one thumb, or you can spread them out, or you can give one thumb to, or 4 thumbs to one person. Who are you giving your thumbs to?
Man, I'm going to spread them around. Jay at least has to get 2. I think there's so much
she's
she
gonna
goes
need
through. Yeah, she goes through so much, and there's so many pieces that she does. I love the fact, like, she goes and finds those guys on the speedboat, and you're like, oh man, she had to. It's not that I don't relate. It's a hard thing to do, and she does something pretty awful. But you know what? Like, she's pushed to that point at that point in the movie. So I'm going 2 for her. I got to go 1 for old friendzone Paul. I thought he was a great character. It wasn't cliche. It wasn't over the top.
Yeah, that actor does a great job. Shout out to Keir Gilchrist.
Yeah. Yara, I thought was a lot of fun. Just totally different character. And I have 1 more thumb.
I think so.
I'm going for Jeff.
Okay, there you go.
So realistic, and he's a shitbag. And when you meet him, when you meet the real Jeff, you're like, I get it. Like, he had no choice.
Because you meet his mom.
You meet his mom,
and they
he had no, like, what was he gonna do? Never live a normal life ever again?
And they sit outside in the grass. It's like a support group. It's really intimate, and you're like, yeah, I feel for him.
And he's still scared. He's still like, can you guys see that little girl walking towards us?
And you don't blame him at that point anymore.
He knows that's still a realistic fear for him.
In fact, he's the only one that can empathize with Jay, because maybe like in real life, only people who experience sexual assault can truly understand what other people have gone through.
Yeah. What it's like to live with something that is incurable.
Well, that's fantastic. Those are some great awards. I love this movie. I'm so glad that you brought it here, and it is not a perfect horror film, but what is? Silence of the Lambs. Someone brought that into me. That's a perfect horror film. But besides that, it's got some slow parts, and it's got some performances. Greg doesn't really do much for me, but what are you going to do? It's still an incredible movie with some amazing 360 choreographed shots that I don't know how they did that. It must have taken them a few tries, but the music in it is this eerily synthy, chiptune suspense that's so good and makes me think of John Carpenter's Best. I'm definitely going to give this movie 4 thumbs as well. And I'm going to award my thumbs to Mr. and Mrs. Height, the parents, who are basically non-existent in this movie. Yeah. Yes, they are there, but they are intentionally written away. They are either obscured or out of focus or just out of shot. Because this isn't their story. It's the story of their kids who literally they could not understand what they're going through.
You know, it's a great point because the dad does come in one major scene, and that's the end, where her dad is trying to kill her for all what she's gone through.
Which is nuts because I don't think we've actually ever seen him.
I don't think we ever see him. We've seen him in pictures. That's the only way we know it's him.
Good catch, actually. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, so I'm going to give 1 to Mrs. Height, 1 to Mr. Height, Jay's parents. I'm going to give 1 to Jay for sure because she carries this whole movie, and she does a great job. She does such a good job of showing off, of portraying that terrified innocence of having no idea of conceiving of what you are, especially in that hallway, the classroom, when she's at school and the old lady goes between those 2 other girls. So good. And then finally, I'm going to give the last one to Yara. I thought Yara was great, and she gets a blood squib in her neck that she had to affect, so she did a great job.
Yeah.
And that is It Follows. Pete, is there anywhere that people can find you online if they want to keep up with you?
Yeah, a couple places. I'm on Twitter somewhat frequently, at Pete of All Trades. And then you can find my website, PeteDealessandro.com. I don't know how you would spell that other than...
We'll put it in the description.
That'll be good. And then, you can find my book, The Un-American Undiet. I'll probably search for that or just look at PeteDealessandro.com.
And the podcast?
On the podcast, you can also find it on the website, PeteDealessandro.com.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, thanks for coming to the show. Next time on the Gory Days, I think if you're following my schedule, we will be talking about... I don't have my schedule in front of me. I don't want to spoil it for you all. Stay scary out there.
The Gory Days.